In this video, we're looking at some of the mixing techniques we use to pull our kick and bass together. Some of them are quite basic and applicable to any kick and bass, acoustic or electronic, while others are quite specific. Don't feel like you need to use all of them on every project. They're more guidelines for how to deal with many of the situations that arise when mixing kick with bass. And also when trying to get different elements with a strong bass component to sit well together. One of the best techniques for EQing and mixing your kick and bass together is to constantly A/B your material against a pro reference mix. And you do this using a low-pass filter applied to the master output, so you're not getting distracted by the upper mids or high frequencies. Here we've added Magic A/B to the master output, plus Synalxis's creative filter. We then assign shortcut buttons to the bypass of each plugin. Before you start trying to mix down your kick and bass, you should definitely check out our programming tips to first ensure your kick and bass are properly mixable. EQ is a tool, not a solution, and so if you can't get your bottom end sounding heavy in 5 minutes using EQ and compression, it's almost certainly playing in the wrong key. Listen to this bass line here. It's lacking a bit of weight. And now listen to it with a layer playing the same thing an octave down. It's got bottom end, but it's lost the definition. But now, listen to it without the layer, just simply transposed 4 semitones down. It's clearly cleaner and weightier. A simple trick to achieving that pro sound in your bottom end is simply removing some lower mid boxiness, and you do this by cutting around 1 to 3 dBs at the 250 to 300 Hz mark from all of your elements in your mix. And you notice how the mix suddenly becomes warmer. We also dial a little out from the bass as well, but we have to be careful, as too much sculpting in this range can actually remove some of the bass's character. Mixing kick and bass is so much easier when you make some space for them. And this can mean some serious high-pass filtering on everything that doesn't need those low frequencies. For dance mixes, for example, we often find ourselves using the filter to cut everything below 250 to 500 Hz on an awful lot of sounds. Although not the kick and bass usually, of course. Here we can hear the effect of comprehensive high-pass filtering on a busy loop. And if you find your mix becomes a little bit brittle and thin afterwards, simply lower the cutoff on some of the sounds. Or try some different filter slopes, until you get the balance right. Be sure not to neglect your kick and bass when you're applying high and low pass filtering. In electronic music, for example, you should almost always cut everything below about 30 Hz, and often as high as 39 Hz, and that applies to channels and mix buses alike. Essentially, it's easier to put a bit of bass back in than it is to clean up a bass damaged mix. And also, don't forget to roll the top end off your bass. Just as making space above highlights your bass below, so too does rolling a bit off and keeping your bass distinct. We can make space for our kick by finding the kick's fundamental frequency, and then dipping the bass line at this frequency. To find it, we use a narrow 3 to 4 dB bell boost, ideally with a frequency analyzer. And then we sweep the frequency backwards and forwards between about 20 Hz and 120 Hz. You'll know the fundamental, because that's the one that just leaps out the speakers at you. And once we've found it, we can then drag the EQ plugin over to our bass channel and simply pull the boost down to make it a cut instead. In this example, our loop features a long, deep kick. And these require lots of space and priority. To achieve this, we can high-pass the bass line above its fundamental frequency, which will reduce the level of that frequency considerably. And at this point, the second harmonic of the bass sits above the kick, and in conjunction with the kick, still provides the perception of the low end. And harmonic generating plugins such as Wave's Max Bass or UAD's Precision Enhancer can really help here. If your bass needs priority, like in this example here, you'll need to thin out the kick a little bit with EQ to make space for everything. Here we raise the high pass until the kick actually appears a little thin on its own, and then we dial it back a smidgen. You might also want to add a little low shelf to the kick at 100 Hz here to thicken the low end. But don't be afraid if you high pass much higher than you think you should. We regularly cut kicks below 70 Hz, as long as it works in the overall mix with the bass. High passing the kick is all very well, but what if the bass line drops out of the arrangement, like in this example? The mix suddenly becomes quite thin, so we can lower the kick drum cutoff with automation in these sections. You might also consider adding a low sub-kick very quietly in the mix, when your bass line and kick aren't playing. On the other hand, during parts where the kick drops out, you can try high-pass filtering the bass line to quieten its sub-frequencies, so that when the kick and unfiltered bass come back in together, it's a real double whammy.
Download over 30 exclusive plugins. Get hundreds of pro-quality samples and power up your production skills with in-depth tutorials. We break it down for you step by step, and you'll see exactly how it's done in expert video guides and producer masterclass sessions with pro producers. Get all this and more with Computer Music Magazine every month on iPad and iPhone, PC and Mac, Android, and in print.